my little intro. So welcome to Coffee Breaks with my G-Work. Today we're really, really excited because we have Danny Nasr joining us from Rebuilding Beirut with Pride. If this is your first one, my name is Zoe. So I'm the Client Success Manager at my G-Work. Perhaps this is your first my G-Work event. So we are an LGBTQ plus business community for LGBTQ plus professionals, allies, anyone that believes in workplace equality. It is a space and a platform for you. And this is our series Coffee Breaks, where we chat to different change makers, activists, campaigners, fundraisers from across the community, discussing how to create change and learning from their work. If you haven't already, make sure you do go to mygwork.com and create a profile. It's free to do and gives you access to all our different events. I'm on there as well, so you can connect with me on there, send me a question, coffee break related or not. And my email address is also on the screen, and my pronouns are she, her. So definitely do reach out if you like. It's always lovely to hear from you. So today we're joined by the absolutely fantastic Danny. It's something I've been looking forward to all week. It's my highlight of my week. So thank you so much for joining us, Danny. How are you this afternoon, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you lose track of the days now and time. Yeah, no, really great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this chat. Also been the highlight of my week that I've been looking forward to.
Oh, fantastic. Well, no, we're really, really lucky to have you on. So we're talking about your project, Rebuilding Beirut with Pride today. I thought to kick it off, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and I suppose your connection to Lebanon and Beirut.
Absolutely, yeah. So my name's Danny. Hello, everyone. I am a queer Lebanese immigrant living in the UK. I've been in London for about 8-9 years now. I originally came for university and I kind of stayed on. Just couldn't leave really, much to Theresa May's dismay. However, so like I said, I'm originally Lebanese. I've kind of always been involved in, to some extent, kind of activism while I was living in Lebanon, and then also kind of when I moved here, quite specifically back in Lebanon, working on a number of different campaigns, specifically around migrants and women's rights, reproductive rights, and so on. And then kind of when I came to the UK, I really found myself kind of immersed in like the migrants' rights kind of activism circle. I have so much respect for specifically kind of LGBT asylum or refugee or migrant specific campaigns and groups, like for example, Lesbian and Gay Support the Migrants, like so much respect for that type of work. Those are kind of my interests. I am, well, in my day-to-day job, I am a diversity and inclusion consultant. I lead on D&I for UNICEF UK. And yeah, I think all of those things have really kind of put me in a position where I feel like I can use the platform that I have and the kind of networks that I've built over the last few years of campaigning to try to kind of do something for my own community back home, which is kind of where I've got to with Rebuilding Beirut with Pride. And I guess it came about obviously after the explosion happened on the early August. And I guess it really kind of left a lot of people just feeling a bit broken and kind of devastated and feeling kind of a sense of hopelessness because we were so kind of far, specifically kind of immigrants and expats that live outside of Lebanon, and feeling that kind of detachment and distance. And specifically kind of the LGBT community, the kind of the center of the LGBT scene in Beirut, if you will, was only 300 meters away from the center of the blast. So we not only kind of saw kind of rolling and indirect impacts, we actually kind of saw the spaces that we've built over the number of years kind of completely wiped out. And so that's what kind of almost mobilized us immediately to kind of respond in any way we can, specifically looking at the most vulnerable in our community, which is the LGBT kind of QC migrants as well, trans women specifically. And that's what we kind of hope to address with Rebuilding Beirut with Pride.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us. You mentioned how the LGBTQ plus community in Lebanon is obviously some of the most marginalized and vulnerable in the area. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about what life is like for them at the moment, or just kind of to do with the blast, but also before the blast for the LGBTQ plus community there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not going to kind of, I think it's when you're looking at kind of the queer scene and LGBT community in Lebanon, you can almost look at it from kind of two angles. One of them is in relation to the rest of the Middle East, and kind of you can look at it in the sense of where we are now and kind of looking from the Western perspective in. I think this is where I try to articulate it. I think with any LGBT community living anywhere, whether their rights are enshrined in law or otherwise, you're going to have so many barriers to kind of everyday inclusion, barriers to kind of safe access to healthcare, safe access to education, etc. But I think what it goes a bit more so in Lebanon is that the entire country is kind of designed around different systems of support, whether it is your family support structure, whether it is the neo-feudal society that we live in. And I guess a bit of context about Lebanon is that while it is theoretically a democracy, a parliamentary representation body, it's very much rooted in sectarianism. So the number of seats allocated to parliament is dependent on the majority that kind of sect or religion has in the government. Because of that, it's not only kind of institutionalized in our political system, it's kind of transcended into our social kind of structures as well. So you have different areas in the country belonging to different religions, and those kind of areas have their own kind of feudal lords, if you will, remnants of a feudal system. And so a lot of the time support for people in Lebanon, whether it's access to education, whether it's job security, is really dependent on what we call a wasta system. Wasta loosely translates to connections. And it basically means who you know within your kind of sect and your group, and they'll open doors for you. Now, with the LGBT community, they're kind of removed from that, because it's not only that they're removed from that kind of political stability or political kind of net, if you will. And I use that stability or net really, really loosely. It is the purest Lebanese form. But then they're also removed, many a times they're removed from their family support structures as well. There were a lot of people that couldn't rely on that kind of state-sponsored aid or localized aid. They rely on family structures. And a lot of people are kind of removed from that because of existing social taboos, etc. But when we're looking at kind of the LGBT community and the issues that they face, a lot of it is coming down to social stigma, discrimination, whether somebody is kind of outwardly visible with their queerness, obviously opens them up to a lot more abuse, specifically trans women. The rights of trans women are almost non-existent in Lebanon. Access to employment is a huge issue because you can't work unless your gender identity matches your national ID card. And also kind of safe access to healthcare. So while there are kind of fantastic NGOs that are providing those kind of safe routes to healthcare for trans women, that all of these things have been hugely exacerbated because of the crisis. So you saw a lot of people, like I said, because the area specifically is so close to the explosion site, it's really just devastated buildings, devastated homes, etc. And it's really kind of exacerbated the pre-existing crisis of social inclusion for LGBTQ people. So we have that kind of almost that level of support, and it is a community. It's a huge kind of really, really collaborative community, and everyone kind of supports each other. And that's down to kind of visionaries like Salsha Elijah and Sandra Milham, but all of these. So the spaces that we'd employ performers, or the spaces that people go for safety, those have been destroyed. So it's really about kind of really holistically looking at how we not only build those spaces, but really rebuild those support structures. And again, that's kind of what this campaign aims to do. It aims to kind of fund and support those who are building those support structures, because we realize that our role in the UK is obviously a privileged one, and the role that we play can be fundraising, it can be kind of gaining awareness, gaining support, but it's really about channeling all of that resource, all of that support into those grassroots organizers in Lebanon who are doing the work on the ground.
Absolutely, yeah, it sounds like it's really multifaceted, the way that kind of all those aspects come together for the lived experiences of the LGBTQ plus community there. And it is, yeah, as us overseas, we should all be trying to use our privilege in that sense to speak up and stand up for them in whatever way we can. And so then I was hoping you could, so obviously we all saw the news, the blast was on the news a lot, but just sometimes it's difficult to digest these things and the news can be skewed at moments. So I was hoping just for all of us here, you could kind of just give us a brief explanation of, I know you've already touched on it, but what kind of really did happen kind of back in August with the blast?
Yes, so, well, I guess on the face value of it, we saw one of the biggest explosions in non-wartime history, in history. we've all kind of seen the videos, and I still kind of get goosebumps kind of thinking about it today, because it was honestly really frightening and really, really devastating the way that people found out about it. People kind of saw videos, etc. But what happened was, there was ammonium nitrate that was stored in the port that was confiscated in a 2014 raid of a vessel outside of off the shores. Those explosions were brought into the port, and they were stored in the port rather unsafely because they were stored also in the fireworks depot. So those stayed in there for a number of years, since about 2014. And there's been a number of kind of evidence showing that there's been correspondence from port officials begging the government to move this, to dispose of them, but documentation has shown that it was just bounced around and kind of blame was kind of passed around. And then lo and behold, on August the 4th, that explosion happened. And I mean, specific reports of what caused it weren't immediately clear, but the gist of it, that somebody was asked to wheeled shut the door that had them, and that started an explosion, or started a fire in the fireworks factory, which then led to the explosion in the ammonium nitrate. I think the scariest thing about it is that they were there, that we were sitting on thousands of tons of explosives. And I think just even saying this now, I get really emotional, because we were there every night. We were there kind of like partying every night. And it was kind of, we were just living on this bomb that could have gone off at any time. And it's really scary to think that it was actually coronavirus that was our saving grace, because lockdown was announced 2 days prior to the explosion. So those areas were kind of cleared out. So it happened, and I had to kind of deal with it. But it didn't only kind of happen as an explosion. The devastation was just so wide-reaching. 250,000 people were made homeless. So the majority of Beirut's buildings were destroyed. I have a number of friends who had to go straight to hospital. Everyone I know in Beirut had their kind of windows exploded. So it was really, really wide-reaching. And a lot of people, you kind of hear this thing, is that it couldn't have happened at a worse time for Lebanon. And the reason for that is that we were really just kind of on the brink of economic collapse, political collapse, and an impending health crisis due to COVID-19. So I think this really kind of opened the floodgates. And prior to the explosion, we had a huge rate of inflation, up to 90%. People's savings were either wiped out, or they were frozen if they were in US bank accounts, or if they were in US dollars. So I mean, to this day, for example, my parents still are not able to access their bank account from October 2019. So in 2019, in October, on the 17th, the Lebanese revolution started. And it was meant to be a revolution to kind of overthrow the kind of sectarian system and the ways that we kind of operate politically as a country. There was a lot of optimism really early on, because it was the first time that the kind of country was united. And we had our first win as the prime minister resigned. Yet you fast forward a year to October the 17th, the day that same prime minister was reinstated. The country's kind of gone backwards in terms of economic viability, and just everything is just quite, well, fucked, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry.
it's equally heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. So thank you, for sharing in your words what happened. And you kind of took this heartbreaking moment, and I can't even imagine what it must have felt like watching that, knowing that that's your community there. But you took that and you turned it into something really beautiful in itself, called Rebuilding Beirut with Pride. Are you able to kind of tell us the motivation of where you kind of went from seeing that on the news to then kind of kickstarting this project?
Yes. I think it was honestly just this overwhelming feeling of anxiety and devastation. And I think, speaking to a number of kind of my friends, Lebanese expats also in the UK, it was just very similar. And we kind of had an immediate phone call where we said, what can we do next? Is there anything we can do? And I think the only thing that we felt that we could do was either kind of raise awareness or fundraise, etc. And we didn't really know what we were doing kind of immediately. So we originally set a target for £3,000. And we made that within 24 hours or less than that. And we started kind of building on that, but we really wanted it. to be not specifically originally looking at how to support the LGBT community there, but rather to mobilize the LGBT community in the UK to support all marginalized groups in Lebanon. So while we identified a number of NGOs that were doing kind of on the ground work, such as specifically looking at kind of mental health, medical health, food support, and housing support. On top of that, we then identified 2 kind of local grassroots campaigns by LGBT groups who were then providing direct support. So we kind of opened it up, and the way that we kind of approached it was not like kind of any other fundraising campaign, because we really wanted, while we were devastated, we really wanted to focus on how we can celebrate queer and Arab art. Maybe even looking specifically at Lebanese art, but how we can celebrate art and the culture that we've built as queer people, as Arab people, in kind of fundraising, in mobilizing the community to support. So we initially went out and said we want to do an auction. And so we called out for a number of artists to submit different pieces that we were going to auction. But obviously the support was absolutely overwhelming. So we ended up receiving upwards of 100 submissions that we obviously couldn't auction. So then we set up the rvp.auction page on Instagram, where people can still kind of go submit art, purchase art, and all that money goes straight to those organizations. So and then we had an event where we did that, beautiful drag shows. It was really just a space for people to come together, celebrate our culture, but also obviously kind of channel that back home. And it was really just a beautiful, beautiful show of solidarity, queer solidarity across the world. And I think that's originally how we approached it, is that we thought we have a really rich and really proud history of queer solidarity, international queer solidarity, kind of back from LGSM to the current LGSM for migrants. And I think we really wanted to channel that, and the response has been so beautiful and overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that celebration aspect of it really came across in the way that it was not just a fundraiser, but a celebration of queer Arab culture. And I think that is, yeah, from the outside, it really seemed like that was a huge part of its success. And how much money have you now raised?
Over 30K so far.
Incredible. Well done. And I know you had retweets or shares from Cara Delevingne, like you're playing it down, but you had all of the celebrities on board with this, from, you know, going from like an idea that you've created with your community to the level of attention that it got, and the success of it is really truly something you should be very proud of, and really incredible. Did you have any kind of highlights while creating the campaign, the project?
Yeah, I think there was 2 things of it. One of them was being able to work a lot more closely with 2 people that I really respect around this. So Ilyas Shahshan and Sarah Atalla, both of whom are kind of Lebanese expats living here. And we kind of just, it was so organically put together that we kind of just came and we were on the same wavelength. We kind of wanted to do it, and we kind of got on with it. The second part was really just the night that we had the auction. It was just so beautiful and overwhelming. And I'm saying the word beautiful a lot because I think that's the key takeaway from this whole thing, is that obviously it was born out of such devastation and it was a response to such a catastrophe, but it was almost a coping mechanism in itself, this whole kind of fundraising, the whole campaign, because for all of us, it was the only way that we felt that we were being useful and that we were kind of channeling back. So that night where people kind of were there in the space, and we had a number of kind of queer Arabs in the space, and I had a little kind of talk specifically in Arabic to everyone there. And it was just kind of this like beautiful kind of like family kind of all together. And we had an amazing performance by Glamru, who is a queer Arab icon. So it was just that kind of space for everybody kind of coming together. Those are absolutely the highlights, but really it's just the idea that we're moving forward with it. Also working and kind of getting to know a bit more some absolute fantastic activists on the ground in Lebanon, and learning a bit more about how specifically how we can build funds, but where it's going, where it needs to go. And also learning a bit more about my own specific kind of LGBT community and the different kind of challenges and the barriers that kind of came about after this catastrophe, but also some of the pre-existing ones I didn't know so much about.
Definitely. The LGBTQ plus community historically has often processed trauma in this way by coming together and actually turning things into a celebration, taking things from a place of hurt into creating change. I think that's something our global community has often been very good at doing, and will continue, I think, to do as the years come. And it is, I think, what you did, a really, really good example of how the global LGBTQ plus community do support each other, and we come together. We are all connected. Whether something happens on one side of the world, we all can do something to speak up and stand together for each other. How do you think we can kind of keep this connection and motivation going to support each other on this kind of, I guess, global level?
I mean, we are in one of the most kind of trying times, I think, for queer communities across the globe. I mean, I think everybody's on the edge of their seat waiting for what's the kind of result coming out of the US. And I think that is going to have ramifications across the globe. We're seeing kind of the rise in far-right populism. We're seeing a rise in casualized transphobia. It's kind of transcended from being outright to just being almost accepted. And that was almost, quite sadly, almost validated by the new BBC press guidance around not reporting around trans rights, or not even that, trans people. I think we're at a point where we almost can't afford to rely on almost existential bodies of legislation, or bodies that, or things like the Equality Act and things like that. And I say that with a D&I hat on. I feel like it's really down to communities to kind of come together and recognize the different kind of oppression and inequalities that we're facing. We're seeing Poland, we're seeing the US, we're seeing various different countries starting to actively reject not LGBT rights, but just LGBT lives. And I think that's where things like Rebuilding Beirut, but just kind of taking the kind of queer solidarity element of that as a key takeaway, that's where and why these things are so vital, because it is down to people and activists and campaigners and grassroots communities to come together to start to respond to some of these things. Because, I mean, in the first week of this happening, you had a number of LGBT fundraisers and crowdfunds go up, totaling over 120 to 150,000 pounds. And that was hugely well received in Lebanon, because that was the only lifeline going in to support these groups. And moving forward, it's not only kind of LGBT groups, it's also migrant women, specifically in Lebanon. I'm going back to the Lebanon context, but migrant women currently live under a state sponsorship system. It's basically a form of modern slavery called the kafala system. These are the types of people that need to be included in the way that we think about queer solidarity. It's not just about solidarity with other queer communities, it's also solidarity with communities who are so marginalized that they don't have the space and the platform and the resources to speak up for themselves. And it's about kind of diverting that attention and also kind of sharing that platform.
Absolutely, and I think as members of only going to become a more connected and a more global community, so it's learning how to do this even more effectively, and continuing and really pushing for kind of our LGBTQ plus community around the world. Like we're seeing with the election, what happens on one part of the world affects the rest of the world. We are all connected and our fates are all connected. So I think, yeah, what you've done is definitely something we can all learn from and continue to kind of do more of going forward. And so what else can we kind of do to continue to support the rebuilding of Beirut? Obviously, it's kind of almost gone out of the news now. The news has moved on in a way, but I'm sure the devastation caused hasn't. So how can we kind of continue that support?
Well, I mean, yeah, like you say, the devastation has absolutely not gone away. I was having a really difficult conversation with my parents, to give you a little anecdote. My parents are both vegans. They are on, my mom is a relatively middle class kind of salary, and they can't afford, they can eat meat, but they don't eat meat, but they can't even afford to buy meat. And this is two people who are vegans, who are self-sustaining most of their vegetables from their gardens, and they can't afford to make ends meet. Middle class people, can't make ends meet at the end of the month. So you can only imagine the majority of families and the average family size is between 4 to 6 people in Lebanon, and how they're making ends meet, how they're doing it. And this goes outside of the queer community. All across the country is just absolute devastation. We saw the price of meat or beef rise from 15,000 pounds a kilo to 50,000. We've seen potatoes go from 500 liras to 4,000 liras. So we're seeing this massive kind of inflation. So what I would say for people to support, two things. One of them is to please keep talking about Beirut. Like you said, it's completely fallen out of the kind of global kind of narrative or discussion. And I think bringing it back into that is that the country, not only the city was wiped out, the country was wiped out because of the various different interdependencies on Beirut, because of the centralization of the way that the country and the economics work. And the second thing is that there's a number of different initiatives that are aimed at kind of supporting grassroots campaigns on the ground that I would really kind of encourage people to do. We're currently building our website where we will be kind of still accepting art submissions, and we'll be selling prints, and all that money will be going to our NGOs. Moving forward, we're going to be looking at specifically Hillam, which is the first LGBT NGO in the Middle East. They're based in Beirut, and we'll be kind of working with them on the next campaign to be channeling the funds towards them, and working with a number of people. But I would really just say, go out, research kind of what you can. I would specifically suggest, obviously, Rebuilding Beirut with Pride, Haven for Artists. They're doing amazing work around migrant women, but also LGBT communities, specifically paying rent and finding kind of a place for accommodation. And they've also set up a shelter. But there are a number of ways you can give back, and specifically also around mental health, which I've not really kind of gone into depth, but we've really seen an exacerbation of a mental health crisis. Embrace, the mental health NGO in Lebanon, which we were donating to, has seen kind of an exponential increase in kind of daily calls. Instances of suicides have gone up across the country. So it's not only kind of a physical or medical or a housing crisis, it's very much a mental health crisis as well. So we're seeing this really permeate all elements of the country and all elements of society. So I would really say for anybody who wants to help, do the research, give to mental health charities, give to LGBT charities, give to charities looking at migrant women, think of the most vulnerable, and really just give that privilege and give that platform to them.
Absolutely. I'll include the links to the organisations you've mentioned and the places we can go to support in a follow-up email to everyone watching. And we will continue on my due work to kind of share the work that you're doing when that website is live as well, so people can get involved. Because what you're explaining, it's not a left or right discussion, it's a human issue. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you believe, that is just a human issue that we should all be caring about, and all be using kind of the privilege that we do have and the privileges we hold to support. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, Danny. It's been a really, really lovely session. And I know I've learned a lot, so I hope everyone else has as well. We've had a few questions come in, so I'll move on to the questions. And I think we're just going over time a little bit, but we'll stay on for a couple more minutes just to get through a few of the questions that have come through. If anyone else watching does want to ask a few more questions, do pop them in the Q&A, and we'll try and make sure that we have time for them. So someone has asked, what advice would you give someone wanting to launch a fundraising campaign, and how to get coverage in the media and maximize the amount that you can raise?
Good question. I will not admit to being a fundraising expert. This is very much the first kind of campaign that we tried to run like this. I think the few tips that I would give is specifically kind of get a group of people who have very different kind of skills and resources and networks to kind of reach out. This campaign only worked and only was successful because we had a really core group of people who were kind of mobilized and energized and ready to take it forward, but also they had their different networks, they all had their different backgrounds and the different skill sets, and everybody kind of came together to do that. I'd also just unapologetically reach out to every single celebrity's DMs, and really just kind of flood social media with it, because that's how we got Cara Delevingne to share it. And that was, I think, one of the biggest achievements of it.
I mean, that's pretty fantastic, up there on lists of achievement. And it is, if you don't ask, you don't know. It's reaching out to these people, because you never know. They may often be happy to kind of use their platform to help support a campaign. And I think the images and whatnot that you used were so instantly recognizable that it was really kind of, whether it was a news article or something that an influencer was sharing, you could kind of straight away tell that it was linked to your campaign. That was
I think
brilliantly done.
the branding and the aesthetics of it, which wasn't really my part of the campaign, but in hindsight, looking back, it was actually really, really, really vital to its success, because people like flashy pictures, people like art, people like graphics, and I think with the age of Instagram, I think it's the only way going forward is to really respond to that. So luckily, one of my co-organizers, Sarah, was very much on top of that. That was her thing. I think that's really why it was so successful. All hands down to her, to be honest.
Yeah, lots of elements to it. That's why, yeah, having a team with lots of different skills always helps. So you can focus on different things. And then we have time for just one more question. So we've had one come in saying, are there any acts of allyship you wish you saw more of towards the Lebanese LGBTQ plus community?
I wouldn't say specifically the Lebanese LGBTQ plus community. I would say, well, I mean, I would really kind of extend it out to our QTPOC community. I think oftentimes we need to be thinking a lot more, to be honest, more kindly and a bit more kind of sympathetically to those who are queer, those who are LGBTQ, who are not white, who may be disabled, who may be trans women, even if we're looking under that. There's almost always this like expectation that they're okay, they're feeling, I don't know how to articulate this. All I would say is be nicer to people. And I think that's the biggest kind of form of allyship, because when I first moved to this country, it was very, very difficult for me to kind of get into the LGBTQ scene, because I felt like I wasn't really included in that, or really wasn't a part of kind of the brand of what that might be. So I think what people can do to be better allies is to actually go outside of their comfort box, but also take the actual proactive act to reach out to somebody who might not feel included, or you might not even know they are, but really just going out and saying, can I help you? What can I do? Not even that, don't even be patronizing about it, be somebody's friend. And that's how we can start to really build solidarity in a micro level. And that's how we kind of, that kind of rolls out to a bit more networks of really queer, beautiful solidarity. And I think beautiful queer solidarity is the tagline from this whole campaign. That's the biggest learning for me, really. And so be an ally, be kind, and use your privilege, and use any platform you have to elevate the voices of others.
I mean, I think that's a beautiful sentiment to finish on for us to all take away and use in our daily lives. That allyship is, it's kindness, it's friendship, it's learning about people different to us, and bringing our community together. It's everything you did with Rebuilding Beirut with Pride. And I think it's all things that we can all take into actions of our daily lives going forward. To do more of, especially in the climate that we are at the moment, whether it's the election or the pandemic, it's something we need more of. Well, thank you so much, Danny, for joining us. This has been so eye-opening and really brilliant. So thank you for being our guest this week. It's been very fun chatting to you as well.
It was an absolute privilege. Thank you so much for the invite, and I really, really enjoyed this chat. And thank you for giving the platform to chat through these things.
No, I'm more than happy to have you on board. And I will, as I said, send out a lot of the links that Danny mentioned to organizations you can support, how you can keep kind of learning and getting involved with the project. So everyone has that. And yeah, thank you to everyone else that's joined us for today. It's been a real pleasure to get to do this. And we wouldn't be able to do it if you didn't join us. So thank you for that. If you haven't already, do make sure you go on to www.mygwork.com and register. It's free to do. There's loads of events like this we do. It's free to create a profile. You can link up with me and Danny on there. And yeah, it'd be great to hear from you. So please make sure you do. We also have some really other fantastic events coming up. Next week on Coffee Breaks, we have Andrea Di Giovanni, pop sensation, that will be talking about their trans activism. So do make sure you join us for that as well. I'll send the link out for that. But for now, thank you so much, Danny, for joining us, and thank you to everyone else.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.